Well, hey everybody, we are back once again with the Takeover and Justice. Man, I mean, we got a real special show for the people today.
That indeed we do. I know there's a lot of people out there that feel like there is no hope left, but stay tuned. We're going to tell you all about it, and we're going to talk about some very sensitive things today. So prepare yourself and get ready.
Well, hey, everybody. Once again, we're back. Season 4, Episode 10 of the Takeover. This is going to be the best, well, I was going to say hour, but this is going to be a 2-part episode. So this one is going to be a doozy. I tell you, I promise you, we are recording on a very special day in our country's history. But before we get into all that, I'm your host, Marcellus, and I'm sitting here with my co-host.
I am actually the best co-host the world has ever seen. Okay, Justice Brown, guilty as charged.
Whatever he says. So
Yeah.
we, like I said, we're gonna do this in 2 parts. So you're gonna see 1 part this week, and then next week we're gonna finish it up. This is it's a special edition we're gonna do. As you know, we have come just through our 20th anniversary of the events of September 11, 2001. So we want to take some time to commemorate that, but not in a traditional way. We want to talk about the inside of what happened on September 11th and how it affected us as a country moving forward from that time to now. So again, as usual, our thoughts are our thoughts. So my thoughts are my thoughts. Justice's thoughts are his thoughts. Together, they're our thoughts. They're not necessarily indicative of the thoughts of anybody else. Not Kingdom Heaven Ministry, not Pastor Lion W. Brown, not Lady Francis Brown, not our parents, not our family, not anybody else that knows us. So if you have a problem with what we say, contact us, not them. But Justice, why don't we give them some introductory thoughts?
Absolutely. So, I'm going to say this. The Big Mac of word is very important. And we're going to start today with a doozy of a word, Proverbs 24, 5 through 6 and 13 through 14. And it says, "The wise are mightier than the strong, and those with knowledge grow stronger and stronger. So don't go to war without wise guidance. Victory depends on having many advisors. My child, eat honey, for it is good, and the honeycomb is sweet to the taste. In the same way, wisdom is sweet to your soul. If you find it, you will have a bright future, and your hopes will not be cut short."
That's a lot, folks. But man, we want you to really pay attention to what the proverb is telling us here. It's telling us to hold on to wisdom and to use wisdom in our lives, because that's what will guide us. And it's just like honey, except it's going to be sweet to our soul. And if we do that, if we hold on to wisdom, then we'll have hope moving forward. And that's what we really want to focus on, is that hope. So remember that. We're going to come back to that scripture. Not necessarily that scripture, but that thought as we move forward. Before we get started, we do want to cover just a couple of current events, because they're very important to what's going on in society today. And we want to make sure that we keep everybody informed. I know you had to see this, Justice, that President Biden announced quite a firm vaccine mandate.
Absolutely, I did see that. One thing that I thought it was kind of interesting, how Biden's whole demeanor was during that. It sounded like a parent, like, "Listen, y'all getting on my nerves. We gonna do this, okay? And y'all testing my patience." Sounded a little bit like Daria Brown. I know she'll never watch this, but that's kind of how it sounded to me. He's kind of like, y'all
Well,
really
he
y'all
definitely was chastising folks. He's like, we've done enough. We've done enough waiting.
right.
It's time to make a move. And so what the mandate actually is he's basically saying all federal employees will need to get vaccinated within 75 days. And up to that point, they need to be tested every week if you're not vaccinated. And he's also putting pressure on the Department of Labor and OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, to follow suit. And any company with more than 100 employees also need to, he's wanting them to follow the same vaccination mandate. Now, that is a serious step in the direction of putting your foot down. So Sleepy Joe is awake.
He's awake.
Sleepy Joe is woke down, boy. So, but speaking of unvaccinated, the CDC just came out with a report yesterday that says unvaccinated are 11 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than those that are vaccinated. That's pretty sobering. I don't know about you, Justice, but for me, when I hear that, it makes me just kind of feel for people that aren't vaccinated, not by choice, though. Some people can't get the vaccine, right, because they have severe allergies or some other condition. But it makes me wonder why make the choice to be in that 11 times more likely number.
And you gotta you have to um you have to let people be people, and you have to let them have their freedoms and things. So there's nothing Biden can do and say and mandate all he wants, but still it's the people's choice. It's the people's decision. And so, they don't have the understanding that we have, or maybe they do, they just don't trust the government. But I mean, I feel for those people too. I mean, I it's like their minds are clouded and they can't necessarily see clearly. The old commercial, I can see clearly now the rain. That was a song. Never, that wasn't a commercial. But the Clearasil, they just need some Clearasil. Okay.
But you know what, you mentioned the choice, Justice, because it's always going to remain a choice. We're in a free country, but there's always going to be consequences to those choices. So if federal employees choose not to be vaccinated, they can make that choice. They can just also choose not to have a job. At your company, you might say, I'm not getting vaccinated. Forget what you say. And they might say, hey, you're fired. Yeah, I don't know. Because the fines are going to be heavy if that mandate officially comes down. It's going to be fight. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be lawsuits. The state is definitely, certain states are definitely going to come against it. So it won't be just smooth sailing for this mandate, but I would rather him err on the side of safety than the side of lackadaisicalness, because I believe being lackadaisical is what got us to this point in our country in the first place. And so we're in a dire straits. The move variation is moving in, and we need to make sure that we nip this COVID thing now before it gets way worse. Way worse. Last thing that happened that we want to deal with current events before we jump right into our topic, because this kind of lends to what we're going to be talking about today. 2 teenagers in Florida were arrested in a plot to shoot up the middle school.
Hmm.
What in the world has gotten into our teenagers? When I was a teenager, I was worried about hanging out with my friends, girls, and sports. Those are my 3 main concerns at that point. Shooting up a school was not on the list, folks. I don't know if you heard that list. It was pretty short. Shooting up a school or even having the idea to do it, plotting, making a plan, that's not something we ever would have done at that age. What has happened, Justice, to our young people in society?
Well, that's a pretty weighted question. I don't know the answers. But I'm just thinking about when I was in school, and we'll talk about this later. But just the mindset that these guys had when I was in school, they would joke around about shooting up the school, calling in a bomb threat. I mean, um, these things we're talked about all the time. And so I don't know for a fact, but I know this to be true. It was so easy for these guys, especially growing up when I was in middle school and I was in high school, to joke around about this kind of stuff. It wasn't seen as being super serious. It was seen as, oh, and then we see things like this happen where the joke becomes a reality, and we're wondering like, how did this happen? But they were talking about this. They were joking around. They were planning this, planning or whatever.
We thought they were joking.
I mean, some people may be, but you got to be real interesting to joke around about shooting up a school.
Yeah, because some things are just not funny. I mean, it's just not. And Justice and I are separated by a couple of decades, so it's kind of crazy to see the difference in what goes on. And back when I was in middle school, and we got in trouble for playing butt tag in the hallways with the girls, and
oh my God, what in the world?
yeah, that's a different story. I'll tell you about that later, young fella. But
Lord Jesus.
now you got kids arrested for trying to kill people, trying to blow up or shoot up a school. What in the world? We're dealing with some interesting things, and so that brings us to our topic for today. Now you all know we normally have something funny, comical here, a video of some sort, but this week just doesn't seem appropriate. So we're gonna bypass that, and again, this is gonna be part one of our two-part series today, our two-part special edition, and we're gonna deal with the topic of there is hope. There is hope, and so we just wanted you to know that there's gonna be a little bit change in the format, and we're gonna get right into what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. So what are we talking about today? So we all know that hopelessness is a state that seemingly many find themselves in today and in recent history. Even in our country's distant and recent past have helped bring about this type of feeling. So everything from racism to 9/11 to COVID-19 have come with a heaviness that weighs down on this great country of ours. So, as we have said in the past, things have many, many gray areas, and the U.S. is no different. Now, we can be the greatest country in the world and still suffer with severe issues. But the beautiful part in all this is that the kingdom message is one of hope, and we, as members of the kingdom, have the answers to those that have seemingly lost it.
Mm. Wow, Justice, that is it's something to think about, man. All the things you said, what we're going to be talking about today, but this, y'all know, I told y'all, the Spirit's been dealing with me in different ways now, and this all kind of spurred from me watching a documentary. The title of it was NYC Epicenter's 9/11 to 2021 and a half. And it was on HBO. I just happened to be flipping channels and came upon this documentary. And just as you were a whole whopping 3 months old when 9/11 happened. So, man, it made me feel old. But it was directed by none other than Spike Lee. You guys will know who that is. It's a 4-part series. The first couple episodes were more dealing with COVID and how that affects New York. But this third episode is the one I happened to flip on, again, just out of nowhere. And it was talking about the events that coincide with the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which is the day we're recording this on right now. And so as I began to watch, I started remembering like many of you, what happened that day. And I remember where I was and what I was doing. But I think also I have a little shock, right? Because some of the details now are kind of blurry in my mind. And what we were watching was it's we were literally living in a historical tragedy. And that is, how do you live through that, right? That's you don't know how to live through that until you actually have to. And I remember the only thing I could compare it to was the space shuttle uh, crash that happened when I was a young child in elementary school, and that's what came to my mind. But the great thing about many of these documentaries is that you get real life accounts from people who were there in various capacities. Some were firefighters, some were police, some were workers who escaped the towers, some flight attendants who were supposed to be on flights that were used in the uh, terrorist plots. Some were people that were there just visiting, some who lived there on a daily basis, and so many others. And the good thing about the director Spike Lee is he's a New York native. So he lives in New York. He's very much New York through and through. And there was so much video footage from the filmmakers and others that were there that I had never seen before. Uh, but I remember having one thought when I turned it off, and I had to turn it off before it was finished because it was late and it was too much. My emotions was getting too riled up, and I was like, I got to get up and go to work in the morning. But I remember that prevailing thought of hopelessness. So many people seemed hopeless during and at the end of the terrorist attack. They didn't know if it was really over. Many of the people interviewed said it felt like a movie, something that you might have seen in the famous movie Independence Day. In fact, there was footage of one guy making a phone call that was telling somebody, "Hey, they got it right in the movie Independence Day. They got it right," which is kind of wild. Um, like I said, I had to turn it off before it was finished. And I went back and picked it back up and watched it the next day. But if you remember, the threat of more planes being used as weapons shut down airports, everything in our country. People were confused, stranded, and lost all over the country, not just in New York. The lack of hope was not limited to just New York. Remember, we had a plane crash in D.C. We had a plane crash in Pennsylvania. All over the country, people could not board planes to get home. So now those people are worried about loved ones. They're hearing the bits and pieces about this and having to deal with it from miles, hundreds of miles away. Even Spike Lee, who directed this, was in California at the time. He was stuck there and could not get a flight back to his family in New York, though his wife had called him and told him to turn the TV on so he was aware of what was going on. He had to beg and plead his way onto the train that was full to capacity, but the porters in the train happened to be back in that day primarily black men, and they rearranged their bunks so that he would have a place to sleep, and then they called ahead to the adjoining train in Chicago so he would be able to ride with the porters again all the way back to New York. And it's crazy, but it's even tough to talk about now. Um, but imagine how that day must have felt for those who saw it happen, but never thought it would. Despite there being a bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993 and the warnings of more threats all the way back to 1984. What I didn't remember, Justice and everybody, is I didn't remember the bombing that was in 1993, though I was around and a teenager at the time. I didn't remember that there was a bomb. Another terrorist group drove a rental van full of explosives into the parking garage underneath the World Trade Center tower and lit the fuse, but had enough fuse for them to jump in another car and escape. And the bomb was so devastating, and it shows that they didn't really understand explosives, but the bomb was so devastating that it opened up a crater 150 feet wide, but 5 stories down into the ground. So they didn't understand that the pressure wave from the bomb was going to go more down than it did up. Now, it certainly killed some people, and many more people were injured from smoke inhalation from that bomb. But it was, do you know, Justice, that bomb was, they were trying to get the U.S. out of Israel. That's why that bomb was planted there. That terrorist group said if we do this, somehow that was going to relate to us getting influence out of Israel, which is crazy. I mean, because Israel, we know, right? Israel is important to us in the Christian faith, and in a lot of our end time reading and studying. But it just struck me that was the reason. Now, this was a different terrorist group in 2011, but they attacked the same buildings, and I gotta wonder why. There was clearly a thought that this was going to have a big impact, and it obviously was right, because it did. But imagine what it felt like to be one of the United Airlines employees that knew the last plane was still in the air, was their United Flight 93, and they had friends on that plane. Or imagine what it felt like to be the lady on that United Flight 93 that called her spouse to tell him that the plane had been hijacked, and she was trying to remain calm, but to hear her break down crying when she's at the thought of, I hope I get to see you and my children again. Imagine how the world felt, not knowing if that plane was going to hit the White House, or where most people now believe it was headed, which was the U.S. Capitol building. People say if you want to disrupt the nation, then you hit where all the decisions are being made. And as Justice well knows, as in his political mind, the Capitol building is where many of the decisions are made for the country. Also, imagine what it felt like for those people that made it out, but they knew their coworkers didn't, or that saw many leap from the. Now you gotta. I don't want you to think about this, but think about this, because it's important to remember. And I had not seen this footage until I watched this documentary. I had seen the footage. I think we all have probably seen the footage of the one person, the man that jumped out, and they showed him going to 90-something stories down to the ground. But then there was another camera angle that showed there was many people jumping out of the building that chose to die from that jump rather than burn to death, that they were doing because of that plane hitting the building. Imagine what it would have been like to see people doing that there. It seems like too much, Justice. It seems like too much to imagine. And it is for us on our own, but not for our God. Not for our God.
Well, that was a pretty lengthy diatribe into the aftermath of 9/11. But there are many things that cause concern and a lack of hope for people in our world today beyond even that. COVID has caused so much heartburn and worry for the past 1.5 years. The burial of the true story of our country by some when it comes to systematic racism and our country's weak response to it is disheartening to many. And we want to show you this. This was, I think it was 1960 something, one of the 64. 1965. Thank you so much. 1965. There was a police officer blocking the path to get to the courthouse. All the guys, they're African American guys. All they wanted to do was go in and pray. We want to show you this.
I can't follow you, and I'm not going to follow you and give you birth for protection. I'm telling you, for your own benefit, you had better turn around and get out of this area. You're not going to the courthouse in a group under condition that you come here, and I'll assure you that.
All we would like to do, sir, is to go to the
Courthouse is closed. There's no business there.
We don't want to go in the courthouse. All we want to do is go to the lawn of the courthouse, kneel and pray, and we'll gladly return.
You take your prayers back to your church. That's the proper place to pray.
Sir,
I'm sure that God will hear your prayer just as well down there as it will up here, but you're not going on this courthouse alone.
Sir, whenever there are men who are in sinful conditions, prayer should be uttered wherever they are.
Well, why don't you pray where you are? Go back down there and pray. You think you're lily white? You think you're not sinful?
No.
Well, then go back to your church and pray.
Well, sir, can we pray together, you and I?
You do your praying. I do mine, big boy. You don't pray for me. I don't want you to pray for me.
Well, will you pray for us?
Because I don't think your prayers get above your head.
Well, will you pray for us?
No, I'm not going to pray for you. I'll tend to my business, you tend to yours. Now, you better move these people out of here.
Sir,
we're trying to protect you.
Sir, sir,
I don't have to love anybody I don't want to love.
Sir,
You do your own loving. You love your little niggas. I love who I please.
do you believe in equal justice for all?
I believe in justice.
Do you believe in equal justice?
I don't believe in equal nothing. There's no two people in this world alike, and they are not equal under any terms or conditions. There's no two peas in the world alike. No two pieces of money nor nothing else.
And sir, are you saying that if I have a quarter and I'm black and you have a quarter and you white, then my quarter isn't as worth as much as your
That's
quarter?
your quarter. I'll
My quarter is worth?
I'll decide what my quarter is worth. You use yours and I'll use mine.
Try you a catfish sandwich in yours.
So that's just one example. And I remember when I was in elementary school watching some of the documentaries and things like that. We saw, I think it was the governor of, I think it was Arkansas or Georgia, and the way he treated those African Americans wanting to just go to school. They sent the National Guard out there. That's just one example. You got COVID, 9/11, all of these examples of why there's a lack of hope of people even beyond 9/11. And so, we use the word hopelessness several times already in this episode. So why don't we define what it actually means? Does that sound like a good idea?
I like it.
All right, so let's do it. Hopefully this is dictionary.com. Hopelessness is A1A, okay, having no expectation of good or success, despairing. So B, not susceptible to remedy or cure. C, incapable of redemption or improvement. And then you have 2A, giving no reason to expect good or success, giving no ground for hope, desperate. B, incapable of solution, management, or accomplishment, impossible. And if I may, I just want to go back to, I just want to go back to 2A, giving no reason to expect good. That's got to hit deep. Like, no reason to expect good things are going to come out of this, or success is going to be the result of me trying to do this. And giving no ground for hope. None whatsoever. There's no hope.
Wait a minute. You know what that just, on the spot, what did they call where the Twin Towers were at? What did they call that in the aftermath?
I think it was ground zero.
Ground zero. What does that sound like? No ground for hope. Ground zero. Wow. That just hit me. When you said that, no ground for hope, that just came to me. That it says a lot. It says a lot. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. But remember, I'm number one.
Oh.
Remember that. Okay.
My bad.
So anyways, no ground for hope, none whatsoever. So, I mean, I'm just kind of curious as to what other people think about the concerns in our world today. What kinds of things prevent people from having that hope? So we've asked a bunch of people 2 questions, And we are going to play back their answers. We want to thank everybody who did submit a video. We appreciate it.
Well, hello. My name is Tasha Hope Munson, and my really good friend Marcellus asked me to answer a couple questions. And because he knows I will do almost anything that he asked me to do, here are the questions. The first question he asked me to answer is, what one thing concerns you the most right now about society / the world? It's a very, very weighty question. And as I thought about it, what I came up with is not the Me Too movement, although that's very distressing. Not the cancel culture, although that's quite alarming. What concerns me most is the new movement. And to me, that means this attitude or societal norm that I notice when people think, and me included, only of themselves. My coverings, my blessings, my opportunity, my abundance. The focus on just me, not the community at large, not each other, not the overall impact of just me, not the damage that we do when we don't consider others around us, not the damage that we do when we don't remember that we are our brother's keepers. We do have a responsibility to each other. So that's what concerns me most.
I would say something that concerns me about the world right now is the cling to misinformation and false information and false truth. We tend to spread out lies and false information on purpose just for views or because we think something could blow up for all the wrong reasons. We're the generation of spreading false information and believing everything we see at first sight. So a lot of people are becoming popular for things that are not necessarily good to society. And yeah, that's very troubling.
So what concerns me most about today, society / world? What concerns me most is COVID-19 not really being taken so serious. We have Delta, and nobody really seems to think that it's real. They're saying it's either a hoax, it's more so politically driven, and nobody is really concerned about it. You see people going to and fro with no mask. They're looking at you like you shouldn't be wearing a mask. And the thing about it is so many lives have been lost, and it's not really being taken to heart.
What thing concerns me the most in the world today? I would have to say just a total disregard for God in the earth. I mean, it's definitely evident and prevalent today in our world, in our society as a whole. It's really sad. I thought about, I think it's from Dante's Inferno, where he said that the greatest trick that the devil ever pulled is to prove to the world that he does not exist. And so I thought about that when I heard that, and it makes sense, because if the devil doesn't exist, then God might not exist. And so just a total disregard for principles, for the things of God, just looking at what's acceptable today that wasn't acceptable even 10, 20 years ago. And so, I have to say that does concern me.
Hello. One of the global problems that I think is a major problem is food insecurity. Most people are dying to starvation because they cannot find any food to eat, and they die of starvation because of that.
I was really taken back to the day it actually happened. I was at work and my husband called and asked if I was near a TV. And so we all gathered around the TV in Lady Francis' office, and we were watching. The first plane had already hit the Twin Towers, and as we were watching, the second one came in and hit, and it was just unforgettable moment. It took our breath away, and I've thought about that so many times, but today I was watching TV and the first responder dispatcher was on. The 911 dispatcher was on, and she talked about how she's gone all these years with guilt, because she said, I sent those people in that building and they didn't come out, and she felt responsible for their death. And it made my heart feel so heavy. That is a concern of mine. And I think about what gives me hope. Well, go back to her concern. Hopefully she can get help to where, and of course she's better today than she was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But it's still something that she has to deal with, and she deals with it. So that is a concern of mine, getting her and others like her past where they are to where they're living healthy lives.
And one of the concerns that I have with the world and society today is that with the world opening back up to us after being shut down for a year, people are returning to work, the kids are going back to school, people are traveling more, just trying to get back into the everyday flow of life before the pandemic hit us last year. That we're not doing what we did when the pandemic first hit. We've let our guard down because we believe that, okay, COVID is easing on out. Nobody's catching it. We can't spread it no more. And with some of us letting our guards down, it has caused our numbers to go back up. And they were low at first, but they're going back up because some of us have let our guards down.
Okay, so one thing that concerns me about society or the world today, I'm going to have to say the hatred and the division that there are among people. I know that there always has been. It seems to be just, it doesn't seem to be okay to have your own opinion. If you don't agree with someone, even if it is just something as basic as an opinion, you get shamed for it, or you just get, I don't even know how to say it, but it's the division and the hatred among people in today's society.
So obviously it's a complex question. I think what concerns me the most in society today is the increased polarization right of the left and the right. We have especially in the US, and the growing hostility to anything that is considered, especially on the Christian right, and viewing everything from a religious standpoint as intolerant or driven in a bigotry. And I think a lot of this is really being driven by social media, which really concerns me in that it doesn't promote healthy dialogue. It's the using of memes, right, to express a point of view or to demonize an opposing point of view, right? And I think that aspect of it concerns me the most. We are allowing both sides to define their opposition in terms that don't really get to the heart of what people believe. If you use an example, a political example would be abortion, right? It's not that Christians are for life, it's that they're against women's rights. So you've defined things in a way that doesn't promote healthy conversation. And there's no room for that in social media. So, and I think that's just a smaller dynamic of what we're seeing in the entire world as a whole, but it's definitely prominent in the US and in social media, and especially in our political environment, which has become far more polarized than it's ever been.
One thing that gives me concern is deception. For some men think themselves to be something when they are nothing, deceiving himself. 1 Peter 2:13 reads, "Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether kings, governors, presidents, prime ministers, princes, supreme leaders, honor all men. My concern is that we live in as free people. Do not use our freedom as a cover for evil with no respect or kindness for anyone. While having in our hearts hatred, disregard to the one who's in charge. This position would not be pleasing to God at all. Would not be pleasing. So let's stay focused, put God first, and don't let the distractions occur, because we all can get distracted. We have to remember to stay focused. Jesus is Lord.
One of my biggest concerns in society is that as a Christian on Sundays, between the hours of 11 and 12 is the most segregated day and time of the week. We have black churches, white churches, and Latino churches when we should be one church of all nations.
I would say, without a doubt, technology. All right, we've been using technology for many years now. Several technological breakthroughs, several technological advancements. A lot of times, technology have the opportunity to have very positive impacts on society. A lot of times, though, I feel as if we're not looking at the negative ethical implications of these technologies. Though technology has been used as a tool to help us. We have the internet. We have several pieces of hardware, right? Computers. Be a lot of things that we weren't able to do without computers. But we also have things that kind of replace our aspects of humanity, if you will, right? Artificial intelligence, for example, that's a big thing. We may not necessarily be in the I am robot stages of it, right? But we still had replace aspects of us, automation in jobs, right? Automations in different areas around the world. Things such as gene splicing, being able to take out specific genes, specific DNA, and change things around in it, right? mRNA is a relatively, I don't want to say new technology, right? It's been around for about 30 so years, but it's still something that we're still, learning and implementing as we go on, type of a thing. So all technology has positive implications, right? Things that we can use in a very good way. It would be very far-fetched to say that technology has been created with evil intentions, but I do think that we need to start looking at technology for what it is as a whole in its entirety, instead of just what it can do for us, right? You have intended consequences of technology, and then you have unintended consequences of technology. So that kind of is what I think is one of my biggest concerns. Making sure moving forward, we're kind of looking at it as a full 360, if you will, a view of it.
All right, so one of my concerns right now about society and in the world, I would have to say, is some of the children of God being distracted. I'm not perfect, and I never will be. The Lord himself is the only one who's perfect in all of his ways. So to say that I'm well aware of the world's issues, but I feel like this should be a wake-up call for us, and not a distraction or a way of a lot of us getting tied up in confusion. Because in Luke 21:11, the Bible says, "And great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines and pestilence, and fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven." I personally try to stay well informed. I don't want to walk around not having a clue of what's going on or anything, but I refuse to tie in to the chaos and just be distracted. I don't want to be that way. With all the chaos, the fear, and there's no unity. I don't enjoy watching the news. To me, it's depressing. I mean, so and so got shot. It's just all bad news. I mean, you never hear usually anything good, but it is a good way to stay informed and to be aware of our surroundings. I just personally, I feel like it's time to get serious and stay in the Lord's presence, because we need him more than anything right now.
What concerns me in the world, man, that's loaded. To see our nation, younger generation, just how lost they are, how far they've turned away from God and believing everything that they hear. They don't even have to see proof now. It's just what they hear that they go with. So that's definitely alarming for me, especially having two teenage sons. having two teenagers is in this world and knowing the difference from the world that we lived in, even having 20 plus year olds. It's just the mentality of the children. It is so far away from God. It's more on the science. It's more on what's popular. It's more on what others say and think. And it concerns me just about the quality of life. People have no concern for life. It's like life is nothing. It's just a big thing that we do. Let's live it. Let's just live life without the foundation of God.
You know what, Justice? What is the thing that gives you the most concern in our world or society today?
Well, I think it's similar to these guys and their responses, but I think more in depth, mine is just that mindset that my generation has, because we walked through it, the shooting almost, or the thing that happened in Florida. That's not that mindset is not uncommon among people my age. I was even there at one point, you know. So I think my biggest concern is with this new generation coming up. How are they thinking? How are they processing things that are happening? Are they blind to humanity and emotion, and so that's pretty much my biggest concern at this point.
It's it's not good,
No.
but that is certainly a concern. Certainly a concern. Well, as for me, since you asked,
Okay.
I don't know, man. I've thought about this since we started planning this episode, and I honestly have gone through so many different things in my mind about what gives me the most concern about our world and society. And I think ultimately it's the idea that access to information has actually made us less communicative and less social. So social media and the internet have opened up information to us, but it's also opened up pathways for false information, misleading. Um, if you think about it, a cult that back in the day used to be just isolated to a little town or a specific area. Now those cult groups can get together online, right? And they can, similar to how the Proud Boys and different groups like that have been able to mobilize in different areas. And the access to that information has certainly shrunken the world, but it has done the exact opposite of what it was intended. Social media was intended to give us more interaction, but it's actually given us less. And now we type in a few words at a time instead of talking. And now we're living based on memes instead of reality. And so now we're allowing a picture and a few words to define what a whole idea is for a group. And it's sad. And and if we don't start back communicating with the idea that yes, you can be wrong sometimes, it's pretty dangerous to think you're always right, because that means you don't have a willingness to change, and that's where we're at a lot of times in our society. So I think that's my biggest concern right now, amongst many. But there's a reason, Justice, that we asked that question so open-endedly. We really wanted people to interpret it the way they wanted to and respond accordingly. So you're going to see, you saw some different responses. You saw some people that went to more of a global issue. Some people were more concentrated on what's going on right now in the U.S. Some people, kind of a mixture of both. But a few things are very clear. A, it was definitely not easy to narrow it down to one thing. B, there are concerns with the very obvious issues, as well as some things that we may not readily think about. And C, people's concerns today are every bit as real as any time in the past. just as his concerns about his peer group, his age range, are just as real as the concerns in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the like. Humanity plays a large part in the concerns of many, and we know human nature has an inherent evil in it because of sin. But one thing you heard about is social media and how it exacerbates some of those issues. Um, and like I said, we believe that the advent of access to the internet and social media is a blessing, but can also be a curse because of what I talked about just before regarding that access to information and also that access to misinformation. When we got young people getting access to talking about, chakras and different things that they need to hear taught from their parents, right? But they're able to go on, they're getting this information, and then all of a sudden they're believing A and B and C about themselves, and their minds aren't even fully developed to process it. And that's where it gets dangerous.
Absolutely. And so if I may, I want to pivot just a little bit. We're talking about the young people. And as a matter of fact, I was just I actually locked my keys in the car and I had to go into somebody's house. But when I went in there, this young boy, he goes to our church. He hasn't been to church, and I know he hasn't been streaming, and there's been nothing for him, from our church, children's ministry, anything like that. So I go in there, and he's like, Justice, look. I was like, what is it? I got the chakras on my phone. I can see. I said, what in the world? What? I didn't even know what a chakra was. He explained to me what a chakra was. I didn't even know. He's like, you need to play these sounds in order for that thing to happen to your body so that it can be balanced. I'm like, what?
So that's a metaphysical thing that he's
Right.
dealing with a mind that doesn't really understand what that means.
Exactly.
Mm.
And so, but anyways, that's a pivot in and of itself. But we're talking about hopelessness. That those during 9/11 and all over the country had to deal with at that time. But what's interesting is this: young people, 20 years old and younger, because I'm 20 years old and younger, didn't have to deal with that at that time. Didn't have to deal with 9/11. The hopelessness we feel today, I would argue, is not the same type of hopelessness that was felt during 9/11. But I would say it's just as deadly and it's just as severe. So you have people my age struggling with depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. You wouldn't believe, I talked about this earlier, you wouldn't believe how common it was to hear people my age joke about killing themselves. I'm dead serious, no pun intended, but I'm serious. I would sit at the lunch table and my friends, they were just, not all of them, but you could tell which ones were kind of dealing with depression. There's like, I'm gonna kill myself, Justice. I was like, okay, they weren't serious, but you don't know that.
I hope you had a better answer than okay.
I was young at the time, so I wasn't really, I didn't know all that I know now.
Yeah, you're still young, but anyway, go ahead.
Anyways, as I was saying before I was interrupted, get that camera back on me. All right, instead of wanting to get better, being able to rid themselves of their hopelessness, some of them, I would argue, would rather stay stuck in the ditch. But let's go a little deeper. Let's go a little further. We talked about the hopelessness that those during the 20th century, in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even before that, the 40s, the 30s, the 20s, whatever. The 20th century felt when they had to deal with that mindset, our officer that you saw displayed. As a young person, that's not something I have to deal with today necessarily. Thank God, because of those that fought before me, they made sure that I have the future and the present that I have today, and I thank them for it. I thank God too. However, we've seen events transpire that hit that same nerve recently. I've noticed that on social media, some people, can gather large crowds of people because they posted something like, this depression is hitting different today, or sure would be nice to smile today. It's even worse on TikTok though. I mean, it's bad on TikTok. So listen to this. People are literally reenacting their inner thoughts on TikTok, and it's like super dark. So, people, they make fun of themselves and their emotional toils for these likes and these shares and these comments. And one more thing, you wouldn't believe how many videos those same people doing that. I've seen these guys crying and discussing their problems with social media. They just had a mental breakdown one day. They got in front of the camera and they said, listen, guys, I am not okay. The smile that you see in these videos, it's fake. So, in this day and age, this is why I say this mindset is really my number one concern, because you don't know, and I don't think you've ever known, but now it's like you really don't know. People can be deceiving with their feelings. You always got to double check first to make sure. You don't need to assume everybody is fine all the time.
And that's why we don't live our lives on social media. We shouldn't, right? And we've talked about this before. Social media is a tool that was generally designed to keep in touch with people, and people you haven't seen in a while, or people you now live in another state or something like that. But man, it was never designed for you to share everything that's going on in your life,
right?
Because that's not how you get help. Social media is not the place to because it's not conducive, again, for that constructive communication that we were talking about earlier. That's not what it was for. So those people that are crying out on social media because of all of the jokes and the reenactment stuff, nobody knows if they're serious or not. So how do you get people? People don't really know when to help you. You know what I'm saying? So I like what you said. We don't assume anybody's fine, because your friends, you need to just check with. Those people, you just ask them, are they okay? And sometimes you ask somebody how you doing, and they give you the same answer every day. If you're really their friend, check with them more deeply, because they might just be giving you that same answer to get you to stop asking. Deflecting. So, behind all that, just as what I said, just piggybacking off what I said earlier, it's ironic that social media really decreases our true socialization, though it's called social media. It's just kind of weird. It makes us less social. I remember Dr. Barclay said social media gives platforms to people that otherwise they don't deserve, right?
Yeah.
And man, that's some true stuff right there.
Mm-hmm.
But again, when you combine that false information, that our propensity to want everything right now, and so we don't want to spend time doing actual real extra research, you get a concoction of things that lead to people making life choices based on memes. That's silly. Also, it lends to, again, not being able to have those meaningful discussions via social media, because nobody's wrong. And if you disagree, then you're part of the problem, right? All of a sudden, you're anti this or anti that, and they defined your position for you. People get to tell you what you mean instead of you being able to define your own position. And we know that perception is reality for people. It doesn't make it reality. It makes it their reality, right? So if you live in the perception that you're always right, you will have a hard time embracing logic that doesn't agree with your views, even if it's logical, just because it doesn't agree with you. And there's so many examples of this. But just as you said something, before I tell you the examples of that, you said something earlier about history and the times that have changed from the 20th century to now, and how you don't necessarily have to deal with some of those same things, but you know what you have to deal with? Think about it like this. This just hit me too. So I'm pivoting a little bit like Justice did.
Oh, okay.
I'm a big fan of shows like Pawn Stars, or used to be Antique Roadshow, right? Where people would bring these things in and get them evaluated for what they're worth. You know what always struck me, and it just hit me the other day. I was watching Pawn Stars, where a guy brought in these two old coins from his grandmother's attic, and it struck me that very few of the people on those shows are people of color because we don't have that history in our grandmother's attic. Because we've lost our history, got stolen from us. So we don't have that ability to go up in the grandma's attic and find something from great 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 grandmother that's still there, because great 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 grandmother was in slavery. And so while things have changed and you don't have to deal with some of those same issues, even though we still have a lot of police issues right now, you have to deal with the loss of that history and not even really being able to trace and track accurately your own history. And that's sad to me. And that's, again, those are one of the things that may not be one of those things you readily think about in terms of what's going on in society, but that's a real thing. We don't know what all of our history is, and we will never know because it's been stolen and buried. And so we're still finding out today about Tulsa, about Central Park and what it used to be in terms of people of color. So a lot of these things we're still being discovered today. So that's the good thing about information, though. We can kind of find some of these accounts. Some of these accounts did get passed down from generation to generation. And so there is some information that is good for us to get, even on social media or just doing our own research. Well, I know this is getting good, but we got to stop right here for this week. We want to tune in next week. We're going to continue this discussion. We're going to get into more of the answer that we have for the hopelessness of the world. But seeing as how, Justice, this is September 11th that we're recording this, we want to just make note of some notable things from September 11th, 2001, just to pay homage, pay respect to an event that changed everybody's life in this entire country. We want to acknowledge American Airlines Flight 11. The crew and the passengers, there was 87 total. They crashed, and this was the plane that crashed into the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. Prayers to those families of those on that plane.
Also, Dan Lewin, who was stabbed on Flight 11, likely the first casualty and thought to have tried to disrupt the hijack, keep his family up in prayer as well.
American Airlines Flight 175, that was the plane that crashed into the South Tower. Those crew and passengers, 65 total. Again, keep their families lifted up because I know this is difficult for them.
American Airlines Flight 77, crew and passengers. Passenger Barbara Olson, she alerted her husband that a hijacking was underway at 9:05 a.m. Her husband was a federal official, and at 9:37 a.m. the plane crashed into the Pentagon.
Her husband was able to alert other officials that it was going down and that they were able to make some adjustments. And so that's why we wanted to mention her. And of course, United Flight 93, we've talked about in great detail, but there were 40 crew and passengers on that plane. We know that plane crashed in an old coal mine near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, instead of the original target in D.C., which is believed to be the Capitol building. And every year they do a nice memorial there in Shanksville, Pennsylvania as well. And they actually got the children of those members on that plane, got them together on today, actually not today, yesterday, and had a really nice memorial meeting with them as well.
And also we want to keep the members of the families of more than 800 people that died when the South Tower collapsed at 9:59 a.m.
The Pentagon's outer ring collapsed a little bit later as well.
Yeah, and keep the families of those that died as the North Tower collapsed at 10:28 a.m. that morning.
And we know that there are some conspiracies about the actual collapsing of the towers. We're not here for that. We're not here for those conspiracies. There's some conspiracies you'll hear about Flight 93. We're not here for that. What we know is people perished. And what people don't remember is the 7 World Trade Center building also collapsed later on that evening, much well after everybody thought everything was over. In the morning, later on that evening after 5 o'clock, the 7 World Trade Center collapsed as well. So, all the families impacted. I think a total of almost 3,000 people perished in these attacks. And we just wanted to, again, because it's September 11th, when we're recording the 20th anniversary, we just wanted to acknowledge that and just so people can remember the families and keep those families in your prayers. So we'll see you next week, and we'll continue delving into why there's hope in the kingdom.